You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us are free, none of us are free, and one of us is chained. None of us are free, 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 and one of us is chained. None of us are free. There are people in darkness.
All right, folks, welcome, welcome. This is the Labor Radio Podcast Network's live stream, our first since our special election coverage last month. I'm Chris Garlock from Union City Radio. With me, Mimi Rosenberg from Building Bridges. Mimi, so good to have you here.
Oh, it's entirely my pleasure and honor.
Okay. My show is based out of Washington, D.C., and Mimi's is out of the Big Apple. And we've got a great show lined up for you. First up, we're going to have Deborah Burger from National Nurses United, and then Tony Reardon from the NTEU. Talk about a little last minute, or I should say another last minute little sleight of hand that President Trump is trying to do on his way out the door, and basically take a whole lot of civil service folks and politicize them. So no surprises, but we'll talk some about that. Plus, we have a great song at the half that Mimi's going to talk about a little bit later on. So all of that coming up. But first, we're going to do a little international news. So Evan, if you want to roll that, we'll be right back with Deborah Burger.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020. I'm Mark Boulanger. Unions in Europe have won a major victory in their fight to have water and sanitation recognized as a human right for all citizens. There are 9 million people in the EU who do not have affordable access to potable water. The fight has been led by the European Federation of Public Service Unions, which operates under its acronym EPSU. To find out more about the initiative, I talked to Pablo Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez is EPSU's spokesperson. I talked to him on the day that the European Parliament addressed the issue. I asked Mr. Sanchez why the struggle to have water recognized as a human right was necessary.
Well, in Europe, more than 63 million people have gained access from 2000 to 2017. That's the broad sense of Europe, so from Russia to Portugal. But according to the WHO, there's still 60 million people who still lack access to the basic drinking water, and more than 31 million who need basic sanitation. And within the European Union, the figures are 9 million still do not have access to drinking water. And, I mean, one person is too many, but 9 million is certainly a figure that is worth fighting against, and for EPSU to campaign to promote the human right to water for every single citizen.
9 million people without potable water in the European Union is a lot of people. Why has this happened?
Well, the statistics did ignore them for decades. And then with the 2008 economic crisis, the number of people who could not afford the rising costs of water and housing and electricity and so on, and the fact that there was a higher number of unemployed, and meant that many joined that group of vulnerable consumers, as they like to call them in the European Union, and we reached that level. That includes documented migrants, it includes minorities such as the Roma community, that includes also many thousands of citizens who basically were cut by private multinationals that operate the water services because they could not afford paying for the water bills.
EPSU has been running a campaign to have access to water and sanitation recognized as a human right, and the European Parliament has taken up the issue. What is the latest news on this?
Yes, today the European Parliament actually voted a resolution in the frame of a piece of legislation called the Drinking Water Directive, in which they do a direct reference to our campaign that we launched in 2012. So it's been 8 years since we've been promoting and campaigning for the issue of universal access in that sense in the European Union. And although there is not a very concrete direct obligation by the different member states of the European Union in the resolution, it sets the ground for more binding targets in order to achieve universal access, with a particular focus, of course, to vulnerable groups of society, which are the groups that actually don't get the basic right to drinking water. This directive only talks about drinking water. There is another one that deals with sanitation. That is, let's say, a more complicated issue. But at least today, what we have is a little step in the right direction by the European Parliament, and in due course, this will become legislation, so within a few weeks. We say that our campaigning has transformed into something concrete for those 9 million people who do not have access, and for those that actually risk to lose their access, particularly in the times where the economic crisis is looming again.
So what's the next step in the campaign?
Well, what we had done in the last few years before the vote in the European Parliament is ensure that the universal access happens at a local level. So basically what EPSO and its affiliates and our allies at the national and local level, what we do is we campaign at the European level, but we also do it at the local and national level. So we would like to see more referendums and more votes in the national parliament in order to get water recognized as a human right in the constitution of as many countries as possible.
And that's it, international labor news you can use. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Sorry. It is all about global solidarity. I'm back. All right. I was all muted there. So welcome back. And again, this is the Labor Radio Podcast Network live stream, our first weekly show. So we hope you enjoy that. It's got global labor solidarity, but right now in this country, it is all about the pandemic. And who better to talk about that than one of the co-presidents of National Nurses United. Mimi, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Well, I'm delighted to have my sister. We both decided to wear red to reclaim the color from you-know-who. And I am delighted to have Deborah Burger, who's co-president indeed of National Nurses United and president of the California Nurses Association, which helped found the NNU, which I must say is a union that has doubled in size in the past 7 years, representing more than 57,000 RNs in 164 different facilities across California. And I have to say that what is ringing in my ears still as I speak to the heroic Deborah Burger are the pots and pans that were clanging and banging in the spring months as the society got out there and appreciated and understood what our frontline workers, the healthcare professionals, were giving of themselves in the midst of this terrifying pandemic. However, as I think about that, Deborah, I am reminded of registered nurse Sandra Oldfield. Sandra died of COVID-19 in May, and since March, she and her fellow nurses had been sounding the pandemic alarm about conditions, dangerous conditions at the Kaiser Permanente Fresno Medical Center, the California hospital where she had worked for nearly 20 years. Healthcare workers are organizing now like their lives depend on it. So let's begin our discussion with an ode really to Sandra Oldfield, but how do we go from the pots and pans and clanging acknowledgement of our sheroes and heroes, the healthcare workers, the nurses, to the death of Sandra Oldfield? Where are we at now, particularly with this spike in the pandemic? And as workers, how do you understand that dichotomy? You're muted.
There we go. That's a perfect question, Mimi. Just minutes ago, the New York Times put out a breaking news release that over 100,000 patients are in U.S. hospitals as of now. And that's nearly double the peak from the first wave in the spring. And yet nurses are miraculously showing up to work. They've committed themselves to make sure that patients get what they need. Nurses have been out in the streets protesting, and crazy as it may seem, nurses have been out on strike. Nurses have withheld their labor to make sure that the patients are taken care of, that they have protections, and that their communities are safe. And my hat is off to all of the nurses in this country and the healthcare workers as well, who have really sacrificed the safety of their own homes and their own families to get through this pandemic and give people the care that they need on one hand. And then on the other hand, seeing public health officials begging people to stay home, begging people not to travel, begging people to do the right thing, and seeing the airports filled with travelers. And so there's a disconnect, and it's really heartbreaking when you're giving your all and people can't help. So
if we can, let's just parse this out a bit, because I want to look at what's happening with the actual employers and what what they've obfuscated in terms of PPE shortages and the like, and then the role of government turning to what should have been in full swing, the Defense Protection Act. But let's first look at how we are to understand the role of the private hospitals, etc. in, again, relationship to, I mean, we know there have been historic problems with staff ratios, and there have been numerous whistleblower protections that your union has really pioneered, if you will, in. But how do we understand that dichotomy? What's happening with those hospitals? What's happening with the federal government?
Well, you know that there is plenty of blame to go all around, and we'll talk about the government, and right now I'll focus on the employer because they had a huge part to play in this, because they borrowed from the production industry by doing just-in-time supply side. And so when they didn't have the stockpiles that they needed, they kept saying, oh, we're covered, we've got it all good. But they failed to recognize the scope and breadth of this pandemic. And they allowed themselves to get lulled into not providing enough safety equipment at the one side of trying to make money. They wanted to make sure that they could, during this whole time, turn a profit. And the people that suffered from that are, of course, our patients and all healthcare workers. So it's really extremely frustrating because the employers are trying to be the victim in all of this. We're helpless. We couldn't have done anything. But as nurses, we dealt with SARS, we dealt with H1N1, we dealt with Ebola. We came up with legislation and plans to deal with making sure we had stockpiles, and both our employers and the federal government ignored this. And where they did have stockpiles, it was nobody's job to figure out when these supplies expired, which is extremely frustrating because we end up spending twice for it, right? First buy it, then it's expired, we have to buy new. So it's really frustrating to be back here as a nurse that knows what needs to be done and have to deal with employers and the federal government who can't work themselves out of a paper bag.
Let me just, if I may, because I'm not sure that people really get this, and why should they necessarily, because it's not out there in the public. But Deborah Burger, you're talking about hospitals turning a profit? What do you mean? Where's the profit in the midst of this terrifying pandemic when you think that, what are we talking about? PPEs, we're talking about gowns, we're talking about gloves, we're talking about masks. How could that possibly be an issue for these hospitals? But where are they turning the profit? What does that really mean?
Well, our federal government, in trying to make sure everybody had access to healthcare and treatment during this pandemic, gave away billions of dollars to primary and secondary and rural hospitals to make sure that there was treatment available. But it still left them in charge of deciding how much to charge. And when you have deep pockets like the federal government is, and you have insurance companies that have deep pockets, you still can make a profit. There are many corporations like Sutter, the Dignity, HCA, Tenet, all of those major chains have made profit during this pandemic. And I think, and many nurses in our organization would agree, that it is at this point immoral for that to be happening.
Now, it's just the other day, you said you haven't missed a cue when it comes to organizing, which is quite remarkable and is certainly a bright spot in the midst of all of this. I want you to talk a little bit about some of the virtual press conference you had and some of the specific demands now nurses, healthcare workers as workers are making in relationship to this terrifying spike, this surge in COVID-19.
Well, what is really astonishing and heartwarming is that nurses know that they need protections in order to speak out. Even before COVID happened, nurses understood that they are morally and legally required to speak up on behalf of patients. And the only way nurses can do that is if they have unions and union rights to protect them when they speak out. During this pandemic, it has been even more important for nurses to have a process and a mechanism and a union that will defend them and protect them during this pandemic. And the nurses in North Carolina were so courageous. Their campaign actually started before the pandemic.
That was in Asheville, right?
Yes. And little did they know that during that pandemic, their ability to speak out on behalf of their patients to secure personal protective equipment was even more important. So my hat is off to those nurses because it is the first union in North Carolina in decades. And it is a nurses union, and hopefully there will be more unions to come. But that is what has been key in making sure that nurses have a free voice. In fact, there's been research done that proves that unionized facilities have better outcomes for heart attacks when those nurses are able to be able to speak out.
Well, as our time races ahead, I want to make sure that we get in. I want you to talk about, and I'll just list them seriatim so we don't forget it. We can pace ourselves from the Defense Production Act to the issue of the HEROES Act and the stimulus, which is being held up, and what that means for our healthcare workers. And then, of course, wait a minute, what do we really need? What's going to protect a society? Am I going with universal health care, Medicare for all? Your positions, Deborah Burger.
So thank you. And they're all intertwined when you actually start thinking about it. There is no way in a for-profit medical system where there's always room to make more money and still get patients treated properly. And right now we have a stellar example of nurses 11 months into this pandemic still fighting to get protections to take care of patients. We have in the several stimulus packages put the HEROES Act in place in order to get the personal protective gear. And when we use the Defense Production Act, which is a way to mandate corporations to produce materials that we need, it was a War Times Act, but it can be used for emergencies. If we use the Defense Production Act, we would be able to produce in the United States all of the PPE we need, and we wouldn't be drawing on the global supply of PPE and putting countries that can't afford to bid against us at risk. So it makes sense that we have the Defense Production Act. And if we had Medicare for all, there would be people that would go to see the doctor sooner so that they're not spreading the COVID around in their communities. If we had Medicare for all, we would make sure that patients would not fear coming to the hospital because they know that a trip to the hospital and then the ICU is going to put their families' lives at risk. So it's all intertwined, and nurses are really good at seeing the holistic picture. And so the Defense Production Act, Medicare for all, the HEROES Act, all of those things are ways that nurses can see that would greatly improve the quality of life in the United States. So thank you for those questions.
Well, you know, you said a magic word. You said holistic. And I happen to have some small relationship to a program called Building Bridges. And it does just that. It's about labor and community relations, which I think are, the intersectionality is imperative. It's imperative for building the union movement. It's imperative, certainly, for the community sector. And of course, as workers, we live in communities and we have a holistic identity. And I want to just talk about, because I think it's so important, the special kind of philosophy that your union, National Nurses United, has that is holistic and brings it together and looks at the totality of the human being in order to advance and organize us as workers and to deal with fundamental issues such as the distribution of wealth, the tremendous disparities, and our lives as women, our lives as people of color, etc. So the philosophy behind your union, which I think should be an inspiration and for all of us as we continue to organize the working class.
Well, we're actually reclaiming a role that nurses played a vital component in since this country was founded. Nurses were involved in the tenement resettlements. They were involved in child labor laws. They were involved in community home visits. They were involved in social justice issues from the very beginning. What happened with industrialization is that nurses were put into hospitals to provide care where they could make money for people. And so they were told, stay in your lane, just go to the hospital, do your work there. And our union said, no, we've always been a vital component of the community. We've always talked about what's right for children, what's right for social justice issues, what's right for making sure everybody has access to healthcare. And so we've reclaimed that and said, no, our lanes are our community, and we will stay in those lanes and make sure that our patients in our communities have what they need to have a healthy, safe, and productive life.
And I would be remiss if I didn't just stand quickly by saying, what do we all do to support our fellow nurses? What do you need from the community? And let's build that labor community alliance.
Well, we are working to make sure that we do get the HEROES Act passed, because that has a huge component of making sure that there is transparency in the distribution of personal protective equipment. However, the biggest thing that we still want to make sure that we get through is Medicare for all. And although President-elect Biden has said that it is something that he's not on his radar, the issue was that neither was the public option on his radar. And we can move him if we all work together as nurses and other unions to make sure that that happens.
Deborah Burger, co-president of National Nurses United, with your fervor, your energy, and your 57,000 RNs in the California Nurses Association, we're going to do just that. We're going to do some moving and shaking. We're reclaiming the red, right? And thank you so much.
Thank you.
And again, we've been speaking with Deborah Burger, co-president of National Nurses United, and really a groundbreaking patient advocacy union, and who has dealt with the staffing ratios, whistleblower protections. Thank you for showing the way and for all the work you do.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Really appreciate it. Keep up the great work, all right?
Have a great evening.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Mimi. Woo! You got a lot in there in a short period of time. Up next, and you see him there now, Tony Reardon with the National Treasury Employee Unions. We're going to talk about what the heck is Schedule F. But first, we have a little music for you, and we'll be right back with Brother Reardon. Mimi, did you want to just say a quick little thing about, because this is your song?
I think, yes, it's wonderful. And it's Charlotte Washington, who was a member of Local 420, District Council 37 AFSCME, and they were are healthcare workers, and they put together, and that local in particular formed a choir, and they would go and picket hospitals and employers and so on, and they would always have their choir front and center. And this is their song, Charlotte Washington, Local 420, DC 37 AFSCME, and we should listen. She's wonderful.
Let's roll it.
I have a dream. One day.
Healthcare. Justice. America of the people. America by the people. America for the people. Which people are you talking about? Are you talking about the wealthy with the means to stay healthy while 47 million go without? No doubt. We need a revolution. It's time for a brand new healthcare solution. Sing it on behalf of the uninsured, because I believe it's so absurd for America, the so-called greatest nation, to be in a healthcare crisis situation.
One day, this nation will rise up.
Justice. Come from the land of milk and honey. But the healthcare industry's addicted to money.
All for one, not one for all.
47 million in dire straits,
excluded by greed and wealth.
So we got to get united in these states
And put the care back in health.
Come on, y'all. Sing healthcare justice for all. Justice. Justice.
I have a dream that one day we will be able to transform the trangling discourse of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Sisters and brothers, I have a dream.
American leaders, how can you sleep knowing you make promises you never keep? Life is short and talk is cheap. Time has come for you to earn your keep. Money and politics corrupting democracy, creating a hopeless healthcare hypocrisy. It's hard to see beyond your illusion of misconception, lies, and confusion.
Every hill and mountain will be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight.
America is a melting pot.
Or is this a false accusation?
Of the have-to-haves and the have-to-have-nots.
We're waiting in anticipation.
Sing up here like Johnny on the spot.
In every other industrialized nation.
So when will we have what we have not got? Talking about a do-or-die situation.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Healthcare song, Charlotte, Washington. Well, Tony, that's a pretty good rockin' intro for you, isn't it?
Absolutely.
She brought the bosses to their knees with that song when the choir went out.
Where they belong. Well, talking about a healthcare situation here, we got Tony's the president of the National Treasury Employees Union. We here in DC, NTEU, 150,000, count them, federal employees. I did not know this, Tony. 33 departments and agencies. Wow.
Yep, that's right.
That's a lot of departments and agencies, but there's a little something called Schedule F, which I don't think stands for what people might think it stands for. Enlighten us, brother. Enlighten us.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me kind of give a little bit of a background so people listening actually do understand it a bit. So the federal government civilian positions are generally in what is known as the competitive civil service. Mm-hmm. Now, in order to get a competitive service job, you've got to compete with other applicants in an open and fair competition. Now, the law gives the President of the United States the authority to exempt a very narrow group of political policy-making appointees from the civil service protections. These employees are part of what is known as the accepted service. Now, citing that authority with the creation of the Schedule F executive order, the President has told federal agencies to identify potentially thousands of career civil servants to be stripped of those civil service protections, meaning they would lose their current rights to appeal disciplinary procedures and firings, and essentially could be fired at will. And so what's happening is these employees would be moved from what is known as the competitive service to the accepted service, and they would lose all the protections that your standard federal employees typically have.
Well, Tony, you're being, I think, uncharacteristically polite here. I mean, let's talk. I mean, this is basically a return, or would be, and I'm sure you filed a lawsuit. This is one of the reasons we wanted to have you on, because you filed a lawsuit on this, and you know, my reading of this is that they're trying to cram this in before Trump, you know, leaves, and the clock is ticking on these guys. But, you know, this guy came in, you know, talking about draining the swamp this is exactly the swamp that folks like you have been fighting against for years, this kind of political patronage crap that goes back, my little bit of research, to something like, like after the Civil War, I think, right? Where you had all these.
Yeah, it actually would, it would take us back to the political spoils system of 137 years ago.
Thank you.
Here's the bottom line. Bottom line is that it is a blatant, illegal, in our view, attempt to politicize the civil service. I think it's important for everybody, all the viewers and listeners, to recognize federal employees take an oath to the Constitution of the United States of America,
right?
Not to a president. And so when we talk about politicizing the civil service, what ultimately the American people want out of their federal government, right, is they want the services, and they want to be able to trust and know that civil servants, federal employees, are doing what is in their best interest, the citizens' best interest, not what's in the best interest of a political party or some individual, in this case, the President of the United States. And so, I remember somebody telling me one time, it was actually a congressman, and he was saying to me, Tony, one of the things that is so amazing about our federal employees, about our civil servants, is that most Americans don't even recognize this, but they sit down at the dinner table every single night, and they've spent their day trusting federal employees. They trust them when they take medication. They trust them when they put the fruits and the vegetables and the meats on their table. And so we want to make sure as a country that our civil servants are being hired and maintaining their jobs based on their merit, not on whether or not they are being loyal to a particular individual.
Which is what we've seen for the last 4 years. Let me just introduce my co-host, Mimi Rosenberg. She's the host of Building Bridges in New York City. Mimi is, I think that's the longest I've heard you quiet, Mimi. I know you have questions here for brother Tony here. I mean, this is outrageous, right? I mean, this is this last minute push, and I have some more questions on that. But go ahead, Mimi.
Sure.
Well, I want to just go back a bit, because there have been outrages for the last 4 years, terrifying attacks on the federal workers. And I am profoundly concerned, and I think people really need to understand more the human face. You started to talk about that. Who are the federal workers? What is this workforce composed of? And I still have Martin Luther King ringing in my ears, because the federal workers, that's one of the most integrated workforce in the country, et cetera. Those are the people of color. They were very often the last hired. And now the idea of radically reshaping the whole civil service by drastically increasing the number and the type of employees who are subject to dismissal. So if you could put really put a human face, and also tell us a little bit more about what's happened the last 4 years of the Trump administration to our sister and brother federal employees.
Tony, do you have 8 hours?
Yeah, no kidding. No, I'd be happy to, Mimi. Thank you for mentioning that. Look, the federal employees, just to kind of put the face, as you say, on federal employees, they are your neighbors. They're the ones that are standing behind you in the grocery store line. They coach your kids in football and basketball and softball and all those things. They are your brothers, your sisters. I mean, they're just ordinary, human beings. And, I often run into folks who think of federal employees. They automatically assume, these federal employees are folks who go out, they retire, and they get to retire living in a big, huge mansion overlooking the river with a boat dock. Totally false. And I think we all saw that a little over a year ago with the 35-day government shutdown, when federal employees were standing in food lines and visiting food pantries. So they're just ordinary human beings, right? And what I will tell you is that they are outraged that a president who lost an election is literally trying to eviscerate the civil service on his way out the door.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, they are anxious, they're upset, and they are very tired of constantly looking over their shoulders, wondering what attack on their pay, their benefits, or workplace rights is up next, is in their future. So employees get it, and they know that if an agency implements the Schedule F deal that's going on, career public servants could be fired before the Biden inauguration. That's how soon this could happen. And they would be fired with for no reason and with absolutely no due process. This is truly, it's unprecedented, as I said, in the last 137 years.
Tony, and to that point, one of the fascinating things, when this thing first came out, I mean, I was thinking, because I've been around DC, long enough, you know how it is in DC, everything takes forever to happen, right? And thank God, unions like yours are very good at, filing suit, and we've often had, frankly, lawyers from the different unions on, and doing the things that you need to do, and whatever administration, to be honest, although obviously they've been busier, in this last administration. But, you need to tell folks about this little thing that he's pulling. You would think that with 2 months is, that's a very fast track, but it turns out he's got a clever way he's trying to end run this, right? In terms of the departments, he's got a couple departments that are kind of fast walking it, is my understanding.
Well, yeah, I mean, and if you look at, for example, an agency where we actually do not represent employees, but it's the Office of Management and Budget, known as OMB.
Right.
They've already submitted their list of employees to OPM. And that list consisted of 88% of their employees. 88%. So, they're basically saying...
Hold on, Tony.
Yeah.
So they said 88% of our employees should not be exempted.
That they should be put on Schedule F. 88% should be put on Schedule F, thereby eliminating any of their civil service rights that a typical federal employee would normally get.
Well, see, we're a show that spends time in the weeds, but tell me, how on earth can that be justified? 88% sounds completely out of this world.
Well, it does to me as well. And, there is, for example, an agency where we do represent employees, the Department of Energy. They are moving forward with creating their list. I heard something today, whether this actually is, what will happen or not, who knows, but I heard a couple of other agencies that are moving forward with the creation of their list. So this is happening. And, that was, and our concern, NTU's concern over it happening, is exactly why we sued the administration almost immediately after this executive order was signed by the president.
Now, where is the suit?
Can I just ask one thing about the lawsuit?
Yeah, please do.
Were you not able to get injunctive relief, something that stopped this from proceeding in this emergency situation?
Yeah, not as of yet. I'm no attorney, so I'm not probably going to be completely skilled at answering all the legal questions about this. But let me just tell you about the suit a little bit, because I think it will be helpful. So the complaint that we filed asserts that the executive order is contrary to statute, which only allows the president to make accepted service designations in certain very narrow circumstances. So in this situation, it is our view that there is no legitimate justification for taking away the due process rights of career federal employees. And so as a result, our complaint asks the court to declare the executive order unlawful and to and enjoin its implementation. So, and we're doing other things as well. But what I will tell you is that once a federal employee is actually impacted by this, because remember, they've created the list in an agency or two. but nobody has actually been negatively impacted by this. Once that happens, then I suspect we will be taking additional legal action. And that might be where we would be seeking some injunctive relief.
Maybe looks like you had another question.
Well, I was just wondering whether or not where we are with the Biden administration. I mean, I was sad to discover that in the postal workers strike, I thought that Biden could just come in and dismiss the Postmaster General. That is apparently not the case. A board can do that. So they are in quite a bit more trouble than I would have hoped for. But in your situation, can it not easily be reversed by the Biden administration? And certainly I would imagine that he would be, my goodness, a friend of the federal workers.
Well, I think he will absolutely be a friend of labor, number one, and number two, federal workers. So what we're asking is for President-elect Biden, when he becomes the president on Inauguration Day, to move very quickly to get rid of this executive order. Now, when I say that, some of that depends certainly on what happens between now and that point. So if, for example, there are many different federal employees who are wrongfully, in our view, terminated as a result of this Schedule F, being put on this Schedule F and losing their protections, then what we would hope that then President Biden would do is fix the problem while that executive order is still in place. And after he fixes the problem, then get rid of the executive order. So that's what we're hoping will happen to solve the problem. But one of the things that we're telling agencies, and I've been very vocal about it, is look, federal agencies, this thing is going to go away. So stop wasting valuable time and resources, and don't even don't even do anything with this Schedule F thing, because it's just a waste of our country's resources, and they are better spent doing more positive things for our citizens.
Let me ask you another question, just a couple of minutes that we have left, Tony. But one of the things that I've been around through a couple of these transitions in administrations, I learned about this thing. I think it's called burrowing in.
Yes.
And it looks like it's starting to happen. So first of all, tell folks what burrowing in is, because it looks to be particularly insidious this time around.
Yeah, burrowing in is something it seems like every time you get a change in administration you hear about. And it is, at least as I understand it, where the current administration will move people that it believes is supportive of that current administration and their views into federal government positions, so that they are there and impacting the way that the agency operates even after that administration is gone. That's where you get that.
By the way, protected by civil service, ironically enough, right? So
protected by civil service laws. That's the
same one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so you've heard a lot in the news about the current administration potentially trying to get to burrow people into some of those positions, right?
No, and that's sort of, and the reason I say it's insidious is that, so you have, I mean, on the one hand, you see them attacking civil service, right, when it's, your members or AFGE, folks that they don't like, but when they want to get some of their appointees protected because they'll be the first to go, because I think there's only 4,000, official, that an administration gets to put in. That was the number that I saw. So it's actually a relatively...
It's a relatively small number, that's correct.
Right. But with this burrowing in, where they try and move those into protected positions, and then the incoming administration can't remove them, or it's difficult anyway, right?
Right. That it is certainly more difficult, and that's why you hear about this at every change of administration, because it does create some concerns.
Wow. So you guys have your hands full. Just a last question before we let you go. I mean, I was thinking you referred to, during the shutdown, and I spent a lot of time, during that time. It was a long shutdown. I'm here at Tacoma Park, and there was a bunch of events, very active events, around this area. With one of the things I noticed about federal workers, they really pride themselves on their professionalism, and they really don't like to be dragged. I mean, almost you can't find out if they're a Democrat or a Republican. And I'm just wondering, are you seeing, your members, they're not really the first ones to hit the streets for a demonstration, let's be honest, right? I mean, that's just not the way they roll generally. But after 4 years of being beat up by this guy, where are folks at?
Well, I think federal employees are often, a microcosm of the rest of the country, right? You've got folks who supported Trump. You have some who supported, obviously, President-elect Biden. The one thing, and I think you were exactly right, Chris, about federal employees and the fact that, they work no matter what administration is in place. Many of them have worked for, 4, 5, 6 different presidents, be it a Republican, a Democrat, whoever. And they do pride themselves on performing the mission of their agency.
Right.
And I will tell you, I talk to our members all the time, and there is nothing that they have more pride in than serving the American people. I mean, it is truly a source of huge pride for them. And so to be treated the way that they've been treated over the last 4 years, it's almost impossible for folks to get their heads around. And so I think many are just tired. As I said a little bit earlier, they're just kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop with this current administration. If it's going to be a pay freeze, or if they're going to attack their retirement benefits, their health benefits, or their workplace rights. And we're talking about a little bit of that tonight.
Wow, Tony Reardon, it's good to know that you guys are there standing up for those workers. You've made it this far, so a couple of more weeks, and then we'll be on the other side.
Oh, we're gonna make it. I will tell you that. One of the other things about federal employees is that they are a robust and tough-knit group. So we're all gonna make it.
All right, that's what I wanted to hear. That's
yeah,
what I wanted to end on a positive note here. So we'll be keeping track of this situation. We may have to have you back on as this develops. But
I'd love to do it.
Spending some of your evening with us. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. Thanks, Chris.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
The president of the National Treasury Employees Union. All right. So before we wrap up, we're going to do a little labor history, and then we'll come back and do our credits. So Evan, if we can run labor history in 2.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 2001. That was the day that energy trading giant Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. history up to that time. At its peak, the Houston-based Enron was the 7th largest company in the country. A combination of mismanagement and all-out greed sank Enron. The company used numerous accounting tricks and loopholes to hide billions of dollars of debt from its shareholders. In August of 2000, shares of the company were worth $90.75. But by November 30th, 2001, they had plummeted to just 26 cents. After filing bankruptcy, thousands of Enron employees were left to go down with the ship. Many employees and retirees had thousands of dollars worth of Enron stock. Employees were told the company would recover. They were encouraged not to sell off their stock and even to buy more, while at the same time, top executives were dumping their stock holdings. When the company went under, the employees' retirement accounts were wiped out. Some who had already retired had to re-enter the workforce. The following January, a New York Times report shared the stories of some of the 4,000 employees laid off in the immediate aftermath of the bankruptcy. One was told he lost his job by voicemail. Another was told he had 30 minutes to clear out his desk. Multiple lawsuits won a portion of the money back for Enron stockholders, but the employees lost more than $2 billion in retirement funds. In the end, more than 20 top executives were found guilty for the crimes they committed while running the company. Enron became synonymous with the corporate greed that has been the hallmark of 21st century America. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
All right, that's just a little historical perspective for us here from the good folks at Labor History in 2. That is going to do it for the main portion of our show here. This is produced by myself and Mimi. That was a lot of fun. And our executive producer and chief engineer, Evan Matthew Papp from Empathy Media Lab. And our research department is Alan Weirdak. Stick around, folks. We're going to, after the what is it, our little show at the top there, we'll come back and do a little bit of an informal debrief and chat. I think we're going to get Gene Lance in there and Alan and Evan. So we'll be doing that, and we will be back. The show will be back next week. We'll have a different set of co-hosts. These are a rotating cast of characters, and I do mean characters from the almost 80 labor, radio, and podcast shows across the country. So on behalf of Mimi and myself, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us are free, none of us are free if one of us is